Greetings and welcome to Malekith's Fireside Lore, with me, Malekith the Witch King. Today we'll be discussing Mousillon, but more importantly, Merovech de Mousillon, the Mad Duke, the Butcher, he who would be king. So we should begin with a quick overview of Mousillon. The Dukedom of Mousillon was, in the old days, a founding dukedom that had territory stretching across the western shores of Bretonnia. However, after certain crazy leaders fell, it was annexed, mostly by Lyonesse, so it's now shadowed its former self with very small territories, including, obviously, the city of Mousillon. So, what remains of it is a backwater, it's filled with marshes, bogs and swamps. The city itself actually is beginning to sink into the swamps, and the people who dwell there generally horribly mutated and known for breeding within their families. So peasant hovels are on the verge of collapse. The streets of the few remaining cities, such as Mousillon and Castle Rochard, are little more than sewers. So that's it on Mousillon. So let's move on to Landuin, shall we? Landuin was the first Duke of Mousillon, and his real-life counterpart would probably be Lancelot. He was the greatest, most skillful noble knight ever to have lived according to the law. He was the one who was purest of heart, skilled in arm. So Mousillon in his day was the fairest land, but when he went away to work with Gilles le Breton and the other Grail companions, Mousillon, in his absence, became cursed. Undead rose up, and Landuin wasn't too happy about that. So when he returned, he cleansed Mousillon, but it was ever after a shadow. He tried to restore it, but unfortunately after his death it quickly fell back into how it was. So now we move on to Merovech de Mousillon, the main person of this, and one of my favourite vampire lords personally. He was Duke Merovech de Mousillon, Merovech the Mad. He was formerly, before he became known as Merovech the Mad, known as the Saviour of Bretonnia, because around 1813 Imperial calendar, obviously records aren't the best of that time, as we know from our own histories, the Red Pox swept through the fair lands of Bretonnia, killing many of the people who dwelt there. Merovech was obviously the Duke of Mousillon at this time, and he was a great warrior, and he looked unhappily at the glory days of Mousillon, wishing that he could restore his land at that time. He wanted to restore the prestige associated with Mousillon. So he himself was he wanted to do well, but he had some advisors that were dodgy, shall we say. And unfortunately for him, they set him upon the path of dark powers. Now at the time, we don't know what those dark powers were, but we'll find out later. So when the plague struck Mousillon, the Duke and his knights, his high-up knights, his core inner circle, remained unaffected by it. So Merovech took this as a sign from the lady and rode out against the rat men who were currently beset in the lands of Bretonnia in the wake of the plague. So first when he went south and broke the siege of Brion. I apologise if I'm muller some of these names, I'm not very good at French. So he believed he was Landuin reborn, the first signs of his madness. He followed the same route as Gilles le Breton originally did with his Grail companions. He headed east to Athel-Loren, which is the forest of the Wood Elves, as hopefully we all know, where he relieved Quenelles from a siege. Quenelles. At the edge of the Enchanted Forge, he met with the armies of Paravon, which were known for their Pegasus Knights, and the Fey Folk, who were the Wood Elves, and battled the Skaven. Now, they won a great victory, broke the Skaven armies, but unfortunately the other knights looked with disdain upon Merovech and his knights because, well, they kind of went a bit insane and started engaging in a cruel bloodbath, you know, spitting the Skaven on spears, probably ripping their throats out. Just a bloodbath. Think of what the Druchi might do if they won a battle. Bloodbath. Although without the slaves. So, Merovech invited everyone who was there to celebrate the victory with a great banquet in his halls of Mousillon Castle. However, when the guests arrived, a horrifying spectacle met their eyes. Dinner was served by shambling servants, and criminals were impaled around the edges of the Great Hall. So Merovech, who by this time was drunk, and he wasn't feeling too happy about how his guests thought of his in-dinner entertainment, shall we say, he claimed to have been dishonoured, and the king, at the time, expressed his disgust with what he saw, upon which Merovech accused the king of being jealous of him and conspiring against the saviour of Bretonnia, a thing the king should have done himself, save Bretonnia. So, this is where the king made a fatal mistake and challenged Merovech to a duel. Now, this duel didn't take very long. Merovech pretty much just tore the king's throat out and filled a goblet with the blood gushing from it and drank it. So, that's pretty much confirming that he's a vampire lord, which explains why I was unaffected by the vampire pox. So, the other dukes ditched it, ran from Mousillon, and Merovech was chosen to succeed the king somehow. The Fae in charge has actually announced him as that, but the other dukes didn't take too kindly to this. Lioness had mustered its army already, and they invaded Mousillon, which some of the knights of Merovech who weren't vampires rebelled because they realised now he was insane. So Merovech stood upon the steps of his palace, slaughtered hundreds of enemies sent against him, bloodbath, but eventually he was defeated, and this was when Lioness claimed a large portion of Mousillon. So, after his death, many of the knights and families felt they owed Merovech still, because he saved them from the Skaven armies. So, in spite of the new king's wishes, they built an enormous tomb for him, beautiful. He was buried there, sat in his throne in his armour with his slain horse at his feet. Just a lovely mausoleum. Pretty much the size of a keep. And it was in the near the centre of Mousillon. However, eventually it sank because of the marshes, and it was thought lost forever. So many have set out to find the tomb, but none have succeeded. Now then, this is where it gets interesting. This isn't the end of Merovech's story. He returns. This is talked about in the Bretonnian omnibus, the novels, which are a very good series. You should, if you ever get the chance, read them. So, he rises from his tomb many centuries later, and begins once again building an undead army. There's a famous quote which he utters when he awakes, or a bit after he awakes. "For 700 years I slumbered. I awoke to find Mousillon a pale shadow of its glorious past. Overrun with vermin, its lands annexed by its neighbours, its very name a byword for despair and failure. But now I have returned. Now Mousillon will rise again, and you, my brothers, will rise with it." So that's a quote that's attributed to him. Quite an inspiring quote, I would say, for his followers. So, what he did, first of all, after gathering some undead, was overthrow the current leader, undead leader of Mousillon, who was a Vargolf, which they called the Old One. And he took over this guy's undead followers, and he was beginning to shape a powerful undead army, but he wanted a champion, someone who would be his vampire general, as he was the Lord. So, he started to go to tournaments, pretending to be a travelling knight. So, he wore a plain white talbot with a black fleur-de-lis in places. He wore antiquated armour, which some people might have mocked him if not for his very noble bearing. Like, wherever he went, he radiated nobility and strength. So, in one of these tournaments, he discovered two young brothers, Callard and Betellis of Garamont, Callard is the hero of the Bretonnian omnibus stories. So, He fought Betelgeuse in this tournament and defeated him with ease, but he was impressed by the potential shown by this young knight. So eventually, Merovech met Betelgeuse again after Betelgeuse had been driven away by Callard due to some events which I won't spoil here. And yeah, the young knight accepted the vampire's offer to train him, eventually accepted the blood kiss. And with his champion chosen, Merovech decided he would seal this bond, and the two blood knights travelled to a castle and slaughtered the entire garrison of knights and men-at-arms, drinking the blood of the slain and burning the keep to the ground. So once they returned to Mousillon, Merovech called forth corrupt nobles from all across Bretonnia. Every dukedom that has corrupt nobles, obviously, because corruption is inherent in the human psyche, I guess. And they summoned them to aid his cause, and he revived his bodyguard of elite blood knights who were known as his seneschals. He used the old one's blood to do this. He killed the old one in a ceremony, and once he awoke these seneschals, the blood knights, they killed the nobles in the hall and raised them as vampires. Now, as they did this, unfortunately he lost Betelgeuse to Callard, who had snuck in, killed him, and then ran away. So Merovech obviously wasn't happy about this, and he was going to kill Callard, but a distraction by an invasion of ghouls allowed Callard to escape. Now, after this, because Merovech knew he'd been outed because Callard had escaped, he marched north and fought to the very gates of Crone itself. Him and his bodyguard, they brought down Lewin the Younker's mount, and Merovech was about to slay this newly anointed king, Lewin, but Callard arrived as a newly anointed girl knight at the head of a wild hunt, and unfortunately bested Merovech in a duel. Well, fortunately for the humans, unfortunately for us vampires, or vampire sporters. Obviously I'm Juju. Now, Merovech was slain here and doesn't reappear in the lore because this was his final death, but he was known in life as Merovech, the Duke, Mad Duke, the King Slayer, because of the king he fought before, and Vampire Lord. So that's all we know on Merovech. Now obviously he's not in Warhammer Total War or anything like that, and the only books he really appears in are the Bretonnian Omnibus, as I said, and also some of the fantasy role-playing ones about Mousillon mention him because of his tomb. So yes, that's pretty much all I can say on him. He's one of my favourite vampires, obviously, on par with Vlad, because he was Bretonnian Omnibus, one of my first introductions to Warhammer. So a little bit more about Mousillon, I think. We can discuss the city, I think, now. What it has in it. So obviously Mousillon is split into different quarters. The city, it has a river flowing through it, which lots of with a port, which obviously pirates and smugglers use, which is probably where the city gets most of its income from these days. So obviously the plague dead are buried beyond the walls, and as such they were risen by Merovech, as we mentioned. So there's a lot of undead that walk the lands of Bretonnia, but for the most part the city is protected against such things. Now, it was originally built on the site of an elven city, but we don't know what it was called, that elven city. But it was large and prosperous. It had the ducal palace at its heart, which nowadays they think is inhabited by ghosts due to certain sounds that come from there. And that's the story of another noble of Bretonnia who has been covered by other people, but I'll just mention him now. Maldred, his name is. Maldred de Mousillon, who decided to try and cheat his way onto the Bretonnian throne by pretending he'd been given the Grail, but it was a ruse by his sorceress consort Malfleur, who was also using her magic to make Bretonnia, or Mousillon rather, look like it had in the days of Landuin, shining and beautiful, but this was obviously just an illusion. Now, they used Black Grail, which is where these Black Grail Knights come from, to turn people, which possibly into vampires, more likely into strange undead. Anyway, Maldred was the last official Duke of Mousillon. After this, Mousillon was disbanded as a duchy. So they locked themselves in the ducal palace, Maldred and Malfleur, and had parties while the Red Pox returned to the city and ravaged it. And when the Fey Enchantress and Grail Knights broke in, they went to the ducal palace and everyone inside was dead. And obviously the sorceress enchantments over Mousillon had vanished, which showed it for what it was, a crumbling, dilapidated city. So yeah, that's probably it for this lore video. I've covered a brief overview of Mousillon and Landuin, a little bit about the last Duke of Mousillon, and obviously Merovech to Mousillon. So yes, I shall see you in the next lore video. Farewell.